Our story begins with a young woman who found herself completely devoted to a mobile game called Emotion Fantasy. She poured her heart and soul into the digital world, happily spending every bit of her life savings to collect the characters she adored. She developed such a profound connection to her favorites that she felt she would do absolutely anything to help them. Her goal was to ensure that the characters she loved so much had every opportunity to truly shine in their own story. She decides that she will take on the role of the story's villainess and perform the part with absolute perfection. The atmosphere shifts to a grand courtyard where a sudden declaration rings out through the air. A young man points an accusing finger at Eldia, loudly announcing that she is officially stripped of her noble rank and her title. Instead of showing any sign of distress, Eldia remains remarkably calm, merely stating that she is curious about what he could possibly mean. Standing before her with a look of intense frustration is William Feedley, the second prince of the kingdom. Eldia refers to the frustrated young man as her dearest fiancé. Eldia's body betrays the intense excitement she feels as a visible shiver runs through her. Eldia is overcome with emotion, pressing a hand to her mouth as she struggles to process the reality of seeing William standing right there in front of her. She begins to admire every detail of his appearance, noting the way his golden hair catches the light with a striking radiance. To her, his eyes are particularly captivating, possessing a deep blue shade that reminds her of a clear summer sky. Her thoughts continue to race as she considers how impressive it is for someone only in their early 20s to have already more than lived up to all of his princely duties. She is further dazzled by the fact that he is also an incredibly skilled warrior and a dedicated member of the military on top of his royal responsibilities. Eldia realizes that he is so incredibly popular. William raises his voice to declare that, despite her high status as a marquise, she has dared to belittle the royal family. He goes on to accuse her of committing a vast number of evil deeds that he believes are a direct threat to the safety of the entire kingdom. The prince points toward her and proclaims that her greatest sin of all is the horrendous way she has treated the priestess. He states that the young woman is considered to be one of the most precious treasures in the entire kingdom and deserves the utmost respect. Sister Yuria looks toward Prince William with a plea in her eyes, insisting that the current situation must be a giant mistake. She believes that Lady Eldia surely has some hidden justification for everything she has done. Prince William responds to Sister Yuria with a soft smile, acknowledging that his actions might seem harsh to someone as compassionate as she is. He remains firm in his stance that Eldia is the source of all the terrible things that have caused the priestess so much pain and declares that the villainess is no longer worthy of any protection. Eldia is moved to tears by the interaction between her favorite characters. She mentally screams her adoration for Yuria. Eldia considers Yuria to be the embodiment of a delicate beauty, noting her striking light silver hair and emerald green eyes. She views the priestess as a genuine angel who conquered her own fears at the tender age of 16 to embark on a quest to save the world and protect her loved ones. Part of what makes Yuria so popular is the fact that she is completely oblivious to the romantic interest she attracts. This trait makes her an instant favorite, leading to humorous situations where she receives from those around her. Eldia ponders the inevitability of falling for such an adorably sweet girl, reasoning that anyone in William's position would naturally want to protect her. She finds herself in complete agreement with the prince's feelings. Eldia firmly believes that anyone who would dare to bully a girl as sweet as the priestess deserves to die 1,000 deaths. She knows she must continue to play her part because she is convinced that if she does not act exactly as the story requires, the entire world will face total destruction. She takes a deep breath and prepares to start her performance. Eldia begins her act by maintaining a facade of total innocence. She claims that she was merely fulfilling her noble duties and doing whatever she thought was in the best interest of the common people. Looking directly at the prince, she reminds him that she worked herself to the bone during her time as a candidate for the priesthood. She asserts that her conduct was always befitting of someone betrothed to royalty and says she is surprised that he would suggest all of her hard work was done in vain. William is not moved by her performance and immediately calls out what he believes to be a blatant lie. He states with total confidence that he is well aware of everything she has been doing behind the scenes. In front of the gathered crowd, the prince declares that Eldia has deceived innocent people and led them toward a path of ruin and corruption. He reveals the final blow to her social standing, explaining that he has already informed the king of her actions and that their betrothal has been officially dissolved. William throws out the ultimate insult by calling Eldia a vile princess, which is actually a title she wears with secret pride. Internally, she is overjoyed that he did his homework regarding her supposed evil deeds, and she celebrates with a triumphant mental victory pose. She hides her smirk behind a lace fan and coolly explains that she only wanted to use everyone for a bit of light entertainment, acting as if she cannot understand why anyone would find fault with her desire for a little fun. A small blush colors her face, as she recalls how much this exact scene broke her heart when she was just a player on the other side of the screen. She feels a surge of happiness, knowing that she is finally living out the dramatic moment she once admired from afar. Both the young man and Yuria look on with heavy hearts, trying to understand the reason for the sudden and cruel change in the woman they thought they knew. Eldia turns her gaze toward the distressed young man and addresses him as her dear hero, licked, thinking, why is he surprised? Looking at the expression of total despair on the face of the young hero, Eldia experiences a strange mix of emotions as her heart both aches for him and beats with excitement. Eldia feels guilty as she looks away, internally apologizing to the hero for her sudden shift in behavior. She reflects on how she was always so kind to him in the past and truly considers him one of her absolute favorites, but she knows that to keep the narrative moving forward, she simply cannot stop here. She peers over the edge of her fan and addresses the young man as her dear hero. She continues her performance by mentioning that she heard about the grave injuries he sustained while investigating ghosts in the western ruins. With a mockingly sweet tone, she expresses her feigned relief at his recovery, noting that such rapid healing is exactly what one would expect from a true hero. Sir Anson steps forward with a look of pure rage, shouting that those creatures were far more dangerous than simple ghosts and were actually powerful liches. He accuses Eldia of being the one who purposefully withheld that vital information and sent the hero into a death trap regardless. Anson gets more angry at her and shouts he is tired of her nonsense. The sight of Sir Anson's righteous fury leaves Eldia completely starstruck. She can't help but celebrate the fact that another one of her favorite characters has finally entered the scene. Eldia's mind is filled with admiration for Sir Anson, whom she views as a straightforward and hot-blooded man whose very nature is as bright and intense as the sun. She recalls how his exceptional defensive and piercing abilities were the key elements that carried her through the most difficult levels of the game. Sir Anson is visibly consumed by rage as he demands to know if the princess has any real understanding of the immense suffering her selfish actions have caused for so many people. Eldia responds casually that she was merely pointing out that she was simply providing people with the specific information they were already seeking out. Eldia insists that the choices people made afterward were entirely their own responsibility and that she cannot possibly be blamed for the consequences of their actions. Below her, Sir Anson fixes her with a piercing glare, his anger only growing at her. Sir Anson finally reaches his breaking point and draws his weapon with a sharp sound as he prepares to strike. Licht watches in alarm and calls out Sir Anson's name, sensing the immediate danger. Eldia remains surprisingly calm as the attack comes toward her, reassuring herself that everything is going to be just fine. She recalls the mechanics of the game, remembering that the villainous character is supposed to block such an incoming strike simply by closing her fan at the perfect moment. Suddenly, someone leaps forward with incredible speed. A man throws himself directly into the path of the blade, shouting out Eldia's name as he creates a human shield to keep her from harm. Eldia watches in stunned silence. The world seems to slow down as the first few drops of dark blood begin to fall. The high-stakes drama causes a wave of panic to ripple through the gathered onlookers. The sharp edge of the blade finds its mark, piercing through the side of the man who dared to stand in its way. Sir Anson looks on with a face twisted in disbelief, unable to comprehend why anyone would ever choose to risk their own life to protect a woman with such a wicked reputation. Blood began to seep through the man named Albert's fine clothes. Sir Anson shouts and demands to know if the man had any idea of the many terrible things the princess had supposedly done. Despite the pain radiating from his wound, Albert simply states that he owed far too much to Lady Eldia. Sir Anson stood frozen in a stunned silence. Behind his protection, Eldia watches with a heavy heart, quietly wondering to herself why Albert would choose to go to such extremes just to ensure her safety. Recognizing that she had to maintain her persona, Eldia tightly gripped the silk of her skirt and looked at Sir Anson with disappointment. She chided him for his barbaric behavior in injuring her servant, openly wondering if the high standards once held by the knights of the kingdom had really fallen so low as to allow for such mindless violence. The sting of her words hit Sir Anson harder than any physical blow, causing his hand to tremble as he gripped the hilt of his sword with renewed intensity. She offered a silent and sincere internal apology to Sir Anson. Eldia gathers her long skirts and turns her back. She addresses Prince William with a calm tone. With a confident smile, Eldia considers whether the prince truly believes that simply taking away her title will be enough to stop her. She encourages him to imagine for a moment that she actually did commit every single horrible act he accused her of earlier. Eldia reflects on the fact that her character's supposed evil deeds have been whispered about throughout the entire land of Feedly. She continues her internal reasoning, noting that beyond this single event, there is no real proof of her guilt other than the simple fact that she happened to be present at the scenes. While she admits that a noble indulging in certain vices might be considered scandalous, she knows that mere rumors are not enough to convict her of anything more serious. She is certain that her loyal servant would never have overlooked such a crucial detail. Tucking her decorative fan beneath her chin, Eldia feels a quiet sense of triumph. She is absolutely sure that the heroes will not be able to find any concrete evidence against her at this specific moment. Turning back to Prince William, Eldia informs him that her priority is now to tend to her servant's physical wounds. She calmly explains that she will be taking her leave immediately. Prince William points an accusing finger, declaring that she is to be confined to her estate until further notice. He shouts after her that she will be informed of the specific punishments for her various other crimes at a later time, punctuating his command by calling her a vile princess once more. As Eldia begins to walk away with a satisfied smirk on her face, Prince William calls out that she should not think for a second that she will get away with this behavior. Eldia performs a graceful and dramatic bow, reflecting on how she was once just an ordinary and somewhat unpopular woman in her late 20s. She feels a deep sense of wonder at finding herself living inside the vibrant world of the mobile game she loved more than anything else. Now, she fully embraces her new identity as the early game antagonist and proudly identifies herself as the vile princess. The protagonist's previous life came to a sudden and embarrassing end when she was unexpectedly crushed by the massive mountain of game merchandise she had spent her life collecting. After the initial shock of her demise wore off, she was startled to find that she had been transported into a new body and was now inhabiting the form of a 7-year-old girl named Eldia Euclair, who happened to be the most notorious and wicked princess in existence. Eldia immediately recognized her surroundings as a perfect replica of the setting from her favorite mobile role-playing game, making her realize that she had been reborn into a digital fantasy world. She understood that she was now a part of the story called Emotion Fantasy, a tale centered on a brave hero named Licht who obtains a sacred sword so he can fulfill his ultimate duty of protecting a gentle woman known as Sister Yuria. In this world, the legendary heroes spend their time investigating bizarre events, such as the arrival of violent monsters emerging from a gate to the underworld, eventually setting off on a grand quest to find and defeat the powerful demon who is causing all the trouble in the kingdom. Because the protagonist had fallen completely in love with the game's colorful cast, she ended up pouring a small fortune into her hobby as she became more involved in the fandom. This dedicated obsession was the exact reason she knew just how vital the role of the vile princess truly was within the game's complex world. The princess was a central figure whose actions carried immense weight throughout the original plot. In the original timeline, Eldia had spent time building a relationship with Yuria, a fellow candidate for the role of priestess. Yuria was famous among fans for possessing an exceptionally rare talent for purification magic. Eldia also extended her guidance to the young hero Licht, a simple boy from the country. She patiently sat with him to explain the intricacies of high society etiquette, ensuring he understood the proper way to conduct himself. Eldia treated both of her young companions with such genuine care and constant encouragement that she seemed almost like a protective motherly figure. The original Eldia was truly a piece of work, rounding up unsuspecting people to serve as test subjects for her twisted magical experiments and forcing commoners to fight to the death just for her own amusement. Behind the scenes, she went so far as to absorb every poison known to man. Also, she could bloom into a lethal and terrifying figure known as the Deadly Blossom. However, there was a method to all that madness because the constant trouble Eldia caused served as the ultimate bonding experience for the protagonists. The girl realized that without a truly vile princess to unite them, her favorite characters would inevitably fail and lose their final battle against the powerful Demon King. She felt incredibly fortunate that she had dedicated so much of her past life to this game, having played through every single character route so many times that the entire timeline of events was permanently burned into her brain. Because her love for this world and its characters was so profound, she made the bold decision to fully commit to her role as the antagonist. She was determined to embody the Wicked Princess with total dedication. Through her own backbreaking efforts, everything seemed to be progressing exactly according to the script, eventually leading to the moment where she was stripped of her noble title just as she had planned. Everything was going perfectly until she noticed one tiny, almost unnoticeable thing that had deviated from the original story in a very unexpected way. Safe within the privacy of her carriage, the princess finally lets out all of her bottled-up excitement, screaming into her hands about how incredibly precious everyone really is. She can hardly contain her joy as she gushes over how adorable and brave Yuria was, especially since the girl still wanted to see the good in her despite her villainous reputation. She thinks Licht is the ultimate protagonist, finding that hearing his heroic lines in person was even more impressive than reading them in the game. Even the intense glares from William and Anson left her feeling overwhelmed with emotion, as she knew their hostility only came from a place of deep devotion to their friends. Just as quickly as she started her outburst, she pulls herself back together and exhales a long breath to regain her composure as she is addressed as Lady Elua. Her resolve is immediately tested when she looks at Albert, whose calm and refined presence seems to radiate through the room. He stands there with a stoic expression. She finds herself completely unable to think straight, her mind filled with nothing but the realization that Albert is far more attractive. Albert decided to start undressing right on the couch in front of her. She turns away in a total panic, frantically wondering why he is stripping so suddenly and begging him to hide his impressive physique because seeing it up close and personal is far too much for her to bear. She hides her face and tries to catch her breath. Albert remains shirtless, calmly asking if his mistress is so heartless that she would deny him the chance to care for the injuries he received while keeping her safe. Meanwhile, the princess is desperately shielding her eyes while she suggests a simple solution, pointing out that he could easily resolve the issue by consuming some of his blood instead. He continues his casual explanation, reminding her that such a method is perfectly normal given his nature as a damper. Turning his back to reach for something, Albert notes that the princess really hasn't changed at all since she would rather endure the discomfort of her servant drinking her blood than have to look directly at his bare torso. It is a well-known fact in this world that as the child of a human and a vampire, consuming blood allows him to recover from his wounds much faster than any normal medicine could. The princess eventually manages a tiny peek from behind her pillow, admitting that she simply cannot bring herself to look at him directly and asking him to be patient with her. She clarifies that this intense reaction is unique to him and begs him to go easy on her. As he reaches for a medical kit, Albert calmly acknowledges her confession, stating that he understands exactly what is happening. He concludes that her strange behavior stems entirely from the fact that the version of him from her favorite game remains her most beloved character. Still hiding her flustered face behind the oversized cushion, Eldia shouts out the name Albert Bennett with a mixture of frustration and utter desperation. She demands to know why a character of his caliber would ever end up as her personal servant. Albert looks back at her with a calm, steady gaze, reminding her that he is by her side simply because she was the one who took him in. Internally, the princess agrees that she certainly knows the facts, but that is exactly where the mystery lies for her. Out of everything that has happened since her reincarnation, the specific circumstances that led to him joining her household is the one detail she simply cannot figure out. Despite her confusion, she can't help but gush over the fact that Albert Bennett is her absolute favorite character, the one she considers her best boy above all others. She remembers clearly that in the original timeline of the main story, he is a mature 26-year-old man. She finds herself completely captivated by his striking appearance, noting that his deep purple eyes seem to shine more brilliantly than any precious jewel while always carrying a faint, sorrowful expression. His features are so delicate and refined that she believes anyone would easily believe him to be a sensitive artist rather than a warrior. The protagonist remembers that Albert's deadly efficiency in battle and his deeply tragic history were exactly what made him such a hit with the fans. He is a master of the shadows, a damper assassin who spends his life taking on the most perilous and difficult missions imaginable, all while looking incredibly handsome in the process. His journey into darkness started early when he was abducted as a defenseless young boy. Instead of a normal childhood, he was put through a series of agonizing experiments and forced into a grueling training program intended to turn him into the ultimate weapon of assassination. Despite the cruelty he faced, Albert's will never wavered, and he found strength in the company of his fellow child captives. Together, they formed a small, desperate family, sharing quiet moments where they would dream of a future where they were finally free from their captors' control. But because this is a classic tragic backstory, things took a heartbreaking turn when Albert returned from an assignment only to find that his friends had not been as lucky as him. He was left standing alone in the aftermath of a massacre, having lost every person he ever cared about while he was away serving his masters. She took over the body of Princess Eldia at the tender age of 7. Long before the main events of the game were set to begin, Eldia realized that all of her favorite characters were still just children, including her beloved Albert. Since the location where he was being held captive happened to be quite close to her royal estate, she felt a sudden rush of adrenaline from her recent rebirth and decided to wander into the dark back streets to find him. Her search eventually led her to a grim scene where she stumbled upon a young Albert right as he was finishing the job of eliminating the people who had been controlling him. Seeing him up close, Eldia was struck by how incredibly young he looked compared to the mature man she had known in the digital world. This heartbreaking sight was the moment everything truly clicked for her, forcing her to accept that this world was now her actual reality. She felt a deep sense of compassion and decided that she simply could not leave him there to endure the years of misery and suffering that the game's original plot had in store for him. However, looking back on the moment now, she admits that she didn't actually spend much time contemplating the moral weight or the grand consequences of her actions until much later. The young princess walked with a sense of purpose, firmly gripping the hand of the wounded boy as she led him toward the safety of her royal estate. Once they arrived, Eldia wasted no time in settling him into a comfortable room within the palace. With a burst of childish energy, she pushed him toward the bed and made it very clear that he was welcome to stay and work for her for as long as it took for his injuries to fully heal. At 16 years old, Albert was already beginning to show the striking features that would one day make him a legend. He possessed the lean, graceful build of a boy who was still growing, yet his natural beauty was so undeniable that it would have been obvious to anyone who looked at him. The princess could not help but chuckle at her own audacity. She realized that her plan likely only worked because her appearance as a small 7-year-old made her seem far more innocent and less threatening than she actually was, allowing her to get away with things a grown woman never could. Her decision to help him had been born from a sudden and uncharacteristic impulse. Knowing that he was someone who generally valued his independence and possessed all the necessary skills to survive on his own, she was fully prepared for the reality that he would likely choose to leave the estate the very moment he felt strong enough to move on. Albert proved to be far more adaptable than she had ever anticipated. While the princess was not paying attention, he began teaching himself the intricate skills required for domestic service. Albert chose to stay behind and began his new life working as a dedicated butler within the grand walls of the Euclid estate. The situation became even more complicated when Albert managed to piece together some of the princess's deepest secrets. While he did not realize she had been reincarnated, he correctly deduced that she was mentally an adult and possessed an uncanny knowledge of future events. He even began to wonder if the term fave referred to some powerful or significant figure from a time yet to come. The pressure of having her secrets discovered caused the princess to descend into a state of total panic. She felt as though she might actually die from the stress, frantically worrying about what he could possibly want from her. In her desperation, she felt ready to spill every detail of her plan before he even had a chance to force the information out of her. Albert began assisting her with a complex and brilliant evil scheme she had designed specifically for the benefit of her favorite characters, treating her unusual requests as if they were the most natural course of action for him to take. She struggled to understand the logic behind everything that was happening. Regardless of the mystery behind his loyalty, she had to admit that having someone with the elite skills of an assassin at her disposal was an absolute gift. Out of everyone serving at the royal estate, he was the only one who truly made her feel at ease, providing a level of comfort and security that no other servant could match. This shift in the timeline meant that instead of rising to the top of the underworld as a legendary killer, Albert had spent the last 10 years evolving into a flawless, first-class butler who never left her side. As they traveled together in the privacy of their carriage, Eldia could not help but comment on the massive mess her life had become. Albert remained perfectly composed, calmly reminding her that there was no need for concern because he had already taken the initiative to plan out her entire escape route himself. Eldia gripped her pillow, mentally cursing her ridiculously talented super butler for being able to solve any problem she threw at him. Even as she grumbled about his over-the-top competence, she could not hide the fact that she absolutely loved it when he looked down on her with such cool confidence. Albert sits across from her in the quiet of the carriage and wonders if she is truly content with how everything is played out. Eldia remains silent for a moment, her eyes wide. He continues by pointing out that she has dedicated herself to helping a group of people he views as nothing more than ungrateful louts. It seems unfair to him that she is choosing to vanish into the shadows without any of them ever understanding the depth of the sacrifices she made for their sake. This observation causes the princess to snap, and she loudly insists that she is perfectly fine with the situation. She explains with intense conviction that seeing her favorite characters happy is the single greatest reward she could ever hope to receive. Albert remains unimpressed, reminding her that she did far more than just play a role, as she invested in countless businesses to boost the economy and worked herself to the bone to raise the standard of living across the entire kingdom. Eldia defensively admits that her frantic efforts were actually a result of pure panic because she was terrified to find that the advanced magic and technology from the game didn't even exist in this reality yet. She eventually settles back against the cushions and sighs, concluding that the transformation of the kingdom was simply the way things turned out in the end. She finds comfort in the fact that her hard work paid off in a very practical way, as she managed to amass so much wealth that she will never have to worry about her financial security, regardless of where her journey takes her next. The princess practically shouted her intentions, declaring her primary motivation for everything was the desperate need to make money so she could properly support her favorite characters. Albert watched her outburst, with his usual unreadable expression. Eldia noticed his stoic gaze and snapped at him, demanding to know why he was looking at her that way when he was the one who had asked the question in the first place. As she clutched her pillow, she could not help but feel that her butler was occasionally a bit rude to her, even though he immediately pivoted the conversation toward discussing their very next move. Albert looked at her with a steady and focused gaze, asking her to rely on the special knowledge she possessed to explain exactly what was supposed to happen in the timeline from this point forward. With a calm and reflective expression, Eldia noted that the formal removal of her family title was finally official, marking the end of her life as a high-ranking noble. The story dictated that the notorious princess was meant to vanish without leaving a single trace behind, successfully avoiding capture before the authorities could ever apprehend her. The kingdom is set to launch a massive search for the missing royal, yet they will never manage to track her down. Eldia explains that the coming days provide the ideal window for her to slip away from the public eye entirely. She reflects on how rumors will eventually claim she either perished or joined forces with the demons, noting that her character is never actually seen again in the main story according to her knowledge of the original timeline. Throughout her journey, her primary focus has been to ensure that the narrative remains unchanged and moves forward exactly as it was always meant to. To guarantee that she can escape this role with her life intact, the villainess understands that she must take decisive action right now to secure her own safety. Having successfully navigated the high-stakes confrontation scene, the princess feels a wave of relief as she realizes she can finally move on from her reputation as the vile princess. She reflects on how incredibly hard she has worked to reach this point, knowing that she is only a few small steps away from achieving her ultimate freedom. Albert quietly acknowledges her plan, stating that he will finalize all the necessary preparations as soon as they arrive at the estate. Eldia finds herself momentarily speechless as she looks at him. Eldia looks at Albert with a mixture of concern and hesitation, noting that it sounds as though he is fully planning on accompanying her into exile. She genuinely wonders if he is truly comfortable with such a decision. Without warning, Albert moves from his seat and leans in dangerously close. He peers directly into her eyes with a knowing and slightly mischievous expression, teasingly asking if she has finally grown tired of looking at his face. The princess immediately loses her composure and shouts that she hasn't grown tired of him at all, pointing out that he must surely know exactly how attractive he really is. She admits with total desperation that the way he uses his striking looks even more effectively than his digital counterpart only makes him that much more appealing to her. Eldia quickly covers her mouth in a fit of embarrassment, realizing she got carried away and accidentally confessed her deepest feelings. Albert simply smiles and settles back into his seat, telling his mistress that since she clearly doesn't mind his presence, she should simply relax and spend her time adoring her favorite boy. Eldia pouts at Albert's constant teasing, grumbling to herself about how mean her servant can be at times. She tries to assert a bit of authority by reminding him that she is still technically his boss, but her attempt to sound intimidating is met with his usual calm stare. Albert acknowledges her reminder with a quiet sense of amusement. He notes that he is perfectly aware of their professional relationship while announcing that they have officially arrived at their destination. Stepping out into the cool air, Albert gracefully extends a gloved hand toward her, offering a polite invitation for her to disembark. Eldia remains frozen inside the carriage for a moment, asking him to wait. The princess finds herself completely overwhelmed by his charm, covering her mouth in a desperate attempt to hide her blushing face. She thinks to herself about how incredibly cool he is while begging for just a single minute to compose herself. Albert mutters a soft observation to himself, noting that she truly does seem to love the version of him from her favorite game with all her heart. Eldia sits in the background with a look of utter confusion. Eldia was finally tucked safely into her bed, reflecting on the fact that the day had been a major showdown. She realized that while she had tried her best to mentally prepare for the intensity of the confrontation, her mind drifted back to the moment Albert leaned in, his gloved hand gently lifting her chin as he looked her in the eye. He had explained that was merely part of his official duty as her servant. Snuggling deeper into her blankets, the princess felt as though she were in a state of pure bliss. She acknowledged that her butler was fully aware of his own attractiveness and definitely used his striking looks to his advantage whenever the situation called for it. Just as Eldia was beginning to drift off, a sharp clacking sound against the window suddenly caught her attention. She realized with a start that she might have an intruder, which was confusing since her room was heavily protected by aura suppressors and powerful magic designed to block all forms of scrying. She found herself wondering what kind of incredibly talented mage could possibly bypass her security to find her here. Curious and a bit wary, the girl rolled over and took a tiny peek from under the safety of her covers. Her eyes suddenly went wide with total shock. Outside the window, A nervous Sister Yuria urges her companion to hurry before someone catches them in the act of trespassing. She is clearly on edge as she prepares to make her move, her hands clasped together in a desperate plea for haste. The silence of the night is suddenly shattered as the glass panels break apart, allowing the intruders to stumble directly into the bedroom. Eldia watches from the safety of her blankets, wondering to herself if she has finally descended into a strange and vivid dream. The princess practically jumps out of her skin, sitting bolt upright with her hair in a mess as she tries to process the sudden invasion. Sister Yuria apologizes frantically for the rude awakening while insisting that she is only there because of a matter of extreme urgency. Eldia can hardly believe her eyes as she recognizes the girl as her top favorite character from the game, who has somehow appeared right in front of her. Licht joins the conversation with a stern expression, addressing the princess by her name and commanding her to leave the estate with them at this very instant. Eldia is further stunned to find her second favorite character, the legendary chosen hero himself, standing in her room. A heavy and awkward silence falls over the room as the three of them simply stare at one another. Eldia is left in a state of total bewilderment, her mind racing to understand why the very heroes she spent years antagonizing are now trying to rescue her. Licht and Yuria stand before Eldia, their expressions filled with an intensity she never expected. Licht firmly declares that she must leave with them right away. Tucked under her blankets, Eldia tries to make sense of the absurdity unfolding in her bedroom, wondering to herself what they could possibly be doing there at such an hour. She finds herself fixated on the way Yuria used such a formal title, unable to remember a single moment when the girl ever called her my lady in the past. None of this was ever supposed to happen according to the original story. Sister Yuria leans in with a look of pure adoration, her hands clasped together as if in prayer while she confesses that she has longed to address Eldia as my lady for a very long time. Yuria continues her heartfelt explanation, noting that the church raised her with nothing but vague expectations and a cold sense of duty to fulfill. She credits Eldia for giving her the encouragement and the reason she needed to keep going, insisting that she only managed to achieve her position as a priestess because of the support she received from the princess. Because of this deep bond, Yuria is determined to be there for her friend in her greatest time of need, leaving Eldia looking completely blank and speechless. Licht remembers how everyone else in his life chose to tiptoe around him. He points out that Eldia was the only person who actually took the time to teach him the essential things he needed to know to conduct himself properly. With a loud and confident declaration, he explains that it is entirely thanks to her guidance that he finally managed to step into his destined role as the legendary hero. Licht looks at the princess with determination, explaining that it is simply impossible for a hero tasked with saving the world to ignore a person to whom he owes such a massive debt. Eldia can only manage a strained, nervous smile as she listens to him. In her mind, Eldia is a whirlwind of confusion, wondering how they could possibly be acting this way when she knows for a fact they saw the undeniable proof of her evil deeds. She figures they must have suspected her role as the culprit deep down, and seeing the evidence should have confirmed those fears. She begins to consider the hilarious possibility that the shock of her betrayal was so intense that they have both spiraled into a state of total denial. Eldia puts on her most sinister expression and mocks the idea of them saving her, pointing out that she never once requested their assistance. She asks if they have already forgotten the serious charges Prince William brought against her earlier that day. Internally, she is desperately trying to convince them that the kind and gentle princess they thought they knew was nothing more than a calculated lie designed to deceive them. Eldia feels incredibly proud of her ability to keep it together while her absolute favorite characters are standing right in the middle of her bedroom, even though her inner fangirl is screaming with excitement. Licht remains unfazed by her act, calmly acknowledging that she was indeed involved in every single dangerous incident they encountered, including the terrifying moment the gate to the underworld opened. He looks her directly in the eye with a gaze full of trust and sorrow, stating his firm belief that she must have had a very important reason for everything she did. Licht continues, pointing out that the corrupt nobles who were exploiting and trafficking people had become a major problem for the kingdom of Feedly. He shouts with a sense of urgent realization that no one in the entire land would have ever known about those crimes if Eldia hadn't personally gotten involved. Yuria joins in by recalling the terrifying moment at the gate to the underworld, noting that Eldia only seemed to appear exactly when Yuria was busy helping people with her purification magic. She reflects on how that confrontation was an incredibly hard-won battle, but she remains certain that the brutal training the princess forced her to endure was the only reason she was able to succeed. Yuria insists that Eldia was always finding ways to aid them throughout their journey. The sheer radiance of their gratitude is almost too much for Eldia to handle, and she finds herself shielding her eyes from what she considers a truly dazzling display. In the quiet of her own thoughts, Eldia reflects on the very moment she decided to take the road of Villainess and the oath she swore to herself back then. She had firmly resolved that she would never do anything that other people would feel they had to take care of on their own. Eldia reflects on the fundamental nature of her reality, recognizing that the hero and the priestess represent the true core of this world, while she is destined to be their ultimate enemy. She views her involvement in their lives as a small way to offer redemption for the suffering she has caused through her various deeds. She firmly believes that if she, as the notorious villainess, takes part in a conflict, these heroes will never fail to intervene and save the day. The princess tries to maintain her act, worrying that while her choices were correct, a direct denial might accidentally reveal far more about her intentions than she would like. She quietly mumbles to herself about her presence at the gate to the underworld, admitting that she really just wanted to see her favorite characters in action and be there to lend a hand if they ever needed it. Eldia finds herself in a state of total panic, screaming to herself that she simply cannot think of a single good excuse to salvage her reputation as a villain. Her frustration only grows when Yuria mentions that there is one more thing to address. Yuria presents a book featuring two people on the cover, enthusiastically announcing that she is a massive fan of the publication Eldia secretly put out. Eldia is absolutely mortified as she lets out a silent scream of pure terror. She recognizes the book immediately as the indie comic she personally created and published, desperately justifying her actions to herself as a noble attempt to provide a much-needed monetary boost to the local publishing industry. She reflects on the fact that she simply had to do it because being transported into the world of her favorite characters felt like being surrounded by a bountiful treasure. She felt a desperate need to express her passion, realizing that despite being in her dream world, she didn't have a single person with whom she could actually share her deep and fanatical loves. To solve her problem, she took her creative interests underground, utilizing her significant power as a high-ranking noblewoman along with her various criminal connections to make her vision a reality. She spent her secret hours channeling the intense flames of her devotion onto the pages of her books. Eldia admits to herself that she simply could not handle the constant pressure of acting like the vile princess every hour of every day. She felt a longing for a private space where she could finally cast aside her villainous mask and be her true self. Yuria hugs the book tightly against her chest, her face glowing with a blissful smile as she concludes that there must be a very good reason for a person who can write such beautiful tales of pure and honest love to also perform such horrible deeds. She finds herself deeply moved by the stories, confessing that the princess's writing makes her heart flutter with an excitement. Eldia covers her face in a desperate attempt to hide her embarrassment, frantically insisting that it is simply wrong to make assumptions about a creator's personality based entirely on the works they produce. Yuria, holding the book up as she points out how the author was always remarkably polite and sincere when replying to messages from readers. She looks at the princess with pleading eyes, begging for an explanation. The princess lets out a panicked cry of distress, demands to know what could possibly make Yuria think she was the one who wrote that story in the first place. Yuria kneels before the bed, calmly revealing that her own fan name is Arurin. She looks directly at the princess and asks if she is truly the creator known as Yukiku. Eldia is left in a state of absolute sweating terror as she can hardly process the shocking discovery that the legendary saintess is actually one of her regular readers. Yuria continues her analysis, pointing out that the author's speech patterns are remarkably similar to the princess's own way of talking. She adds that the men featured in the stories bear a striking resemblance to Prince William and Sir Anson, a detail that first made her begin to wonder about the creator's true identity. Eldia is sent into a complete internal panic, screaming to herself about how she never once considered that her writing style or character choices would be so easy to recognize. The self-publishing culture that Eldia originally introduced began to spread through the capital city like wildfire, eventually growing to the point where even total beginners could submit their own stories to various scenes. To further support the growing community, a special service was established allowing fans to anonymously send mail to authors through the publisher. Irurin and Yuku were both regular contributors and often sent letters to each other. Licht suddenly joins the conversation, his face turning red as he fidgets, and admits that the stories about two girls falling in love were actually quite exciting to read. He confesses with a shy expression that the princess's work opened the door to an entirely new world for him. Yuria turns to Licht with a bit of academic frustration, reminding him that the specific genre of stories he enjoyed is officially known as girls' love, or GL for short. Licht offers a simple, dazed acknowledgement. With a sudden burst of enthusiasm, Licht looks directly at the princess and declares a sincere appreciation for the girls' love stories she wrote. Eldia enters a state of total mental collapse as she recalls the specific, juicy details of her own work, noting that her stories involve complex power dynamics between older and younger women that eventually take a very intense and revealing turn. She is haunted by the terrifying realization that Yuria must have shared these mature tales with Licht. Licht and Yuria reach out to firmly grip Eldia's hands. Licht warns her with a heavy expression that she won't be given any opportunity to explain her side of the story before the authorities try to take her life, but he promises that they will protect her at all costs if she will only agree to flee the estate with them right now. Yuria leans in with a sharp gaze, stating that the princess is hiding some critical piece of information about the situation. Eldia is left making a faint, incoherent sound of bewilderment. Licht narrows his eyes, his voice dropping to a serious tone as he admits that he can sense something is fundamentally wrong with the current state of the kingdom. Licht and Yuria look at the princess with unwavering trust. Yuria explains that they want her to join them on their journey so they can work together to uncover the truth about what is happening to the kingdom and the world at large. Eldia is screaming internally about how that specific line is a legendary hero trope that has won over countless characters in the original game. She feels absolutely thrilled and completely confused, wondering why they are using such an iconic, heart-melting invitation on her when she is supposed to be the vile villainess. The princess begins to sweat as she desperately wonders how she managed to mess up the original story so badly. She realizes with a sense of growing dread that her favorite heroes are already starting to notice the abnormalities she tried to hide, and she finds herself pleading for someone to come and save her from the mounting chaos. Albert charges into the room with a look of frantic concern, shouting out the name Lady Elua. The quiet scene of the room is palpable as the hero and the priestess maintain their firm hold on Eldia's hands. Albert lets out a thunderous roar of pure protective fury, demanding to know exactly what the intruders think they are doing to his lady. His eyes burn with a terrifying intensity that matches the sharp, metallic sound of his blade being drawn from its sheath. Albert lunges forward with incredible speed, his weapon clashing against Licht's sacred sword. Albert takes a sharp blade and deliberately cuts into his own palm with a sudden snap. Licht finds himself completely stunned by the realization that his opponent has the terrifying ability to turn his own life force into a literal chain. Albert swings the weapon with a powerful rush of air, forcing Licht to pull back and raise his sacred sword in a defensive stance. Eldia realizes that her butler is genuinely attempting to kill her favorite characters because he views their sudden presence in her room as a direct threat to her safety. Sister Yuria is visibly shaken by the discovery that the person standing before them is actually a vampire, a realization that makes her even more desperate to act. She prepares her purification magic to counter the servant's power. Sister Yuria unleashes a surge of energy, her hand reaching out as a complex magic circle illuminates the dark room with a sudden, brilliant flash. Eldia is deep in thought, reflecting on how this specific type of holy power is famously effective when used against monsters that are rampaging through the world. However, she begins to suspect that the situation might not be going exactly as her friends intended it to. Eldia realizes that since Albert is perfectly calm and not actually rampaging, the powerful purification spell is nothing more than some harmless bright lights to him. Licht senses the growing danger and calls out for Yuria to get out of there, warning her that their opponent is far stronger than he looks. Amidst the chaos, Yuria reaches for Eldia and urgently pleads for her lady to come along. Albert screams for the intruders to unhand his mistress. As she is whisked away from the scene, Eldia can only feel a twinge of guilt, silently offering an apology to Yuria for the overwhelming mess. Eldia decides she has finally had enough of the chaos, stomping her bare foot down with a heavy thud. She firmly yanks her hands away from the hero and the priestess. The entire group is caught off guard as a surge of dark, shadowy energy erupts from the princess, instantly coiling around Licht, Yuria, and even her own butler, Albert. Licht realizes that Eldia has just used a powerful and unexpected form of magic to take control of the situation. Eldia's transition into her full authority as she lets out a thunderous command for absolute silence from everyone present. She sternly reminds her uninvited guests that this is her own private domicile. A tense and quiet stillness falls over the room as the powerful bonds hold all three legendary figures in place. Eldia admits that while her late-night visitors were certainly quite rude to break in the way they did, she has concluded that they were simply acting out of a deep and sincere worry for her well-being. She politely asks Albert if he could hold off on his plan to expel them for just a little while longer. Albert manages to look remarkably composed despite his current predicament, stating that before anything else happens, he would truly appreciate a thorough explanation for the bizarre scene unfolding in the room. Eldia notes with a hint of mock amazement that her visitors are still quite fond of her and actually want to prove her innocence, though she concludes with a sigh that she simply cannot choose to go with them. She puts on her best mysterious expression as she addresses her servant, asking if he hasn't already figured out the truth of the situation for himself. The truth is she has absolutely no clue why the heroes are so weirdly attached to her in the first place. She realizes with a sense of growing desperation that she needs to come up with a believable cover story to get them to leave peacefully and finds herself sending out a mental distress signal for her butler to help her out. Albert gives a subtle and reassuring nod, proving to Eldia that he has once again caught on to her secret intentions with remarkable speed. Albert starts to retract his terrifying weapon, the blood chains sliding back toward his hand with a soft whooshing sound. Albert looks at the princess with a calm and steady gaze, telling her that she hasn't actually become as deeply steeped in evil as she seems to believe. He explains that her supposedly villainous actions have actually had a positive influence on a great many people, including both the legendary hero and the holy priestess. Albert remains perfectly serious as he suggests that if it hadn't been for the unlucky circumstances surrounding her birth, she likely could have lived her entire life in a much brighter and more peaceful world. Eldia speaks his name in a soft and bewildered tone. Albert leans in close to her face and looks directly into her eyes, admitting that despite everything, she was the one who ultimately allowed him to develop genuine feelings for her. Eldia realizes that his confession is very shocking news to her. She finds herself in a state of utter panic as Albert's hand slides over her own. Sister Yuria watches the scene from the background, letting out a small gasp of surprise as she sees the butler suddenly pull the princess away with a firm and purposeful tug. Albert continued his intense confession, recalling the moment Eldia first allowed him to pierce her skin with his fangs as a damper. He looks at her with deep longing, admitting that since that day, he has spent every moment waiting for the time when she would finally be freed from the heavy fate she carries as the notorious princess. Albert slowly starts to slide his hand away, telling her that if her true wish is still to leave with the hero and the priestess, he will simply vanish from her life. Eldia suddenly realizes that her butler is being absolutely brilliant, as he is clearly using this dramatic scene as a perfect chance for them to make a quick getaway. She figures that he is intentionally trying to make them look like a pair of tragic, star-crossed lovers to trick the heroes and she decides that playing with their emotions is definitely the most effective way to secure their escape. The princess's inner struggle as she finds that her own heart is pounding so loudly that she is worried it might actually burst right out of her chest. She pulls Albert with a sudden burst of frantic energy, shouting in mind that they should just go ahead and do this. Eldia leans in close to her butler, her expression filled with a sudden and intense determination as she tells him that he is sorely mistaken if he truly believes her to be the kind of woman who would ever break a promise she has made. Albert looks back at her with a gaze that is incredibly focused as she tells how many times she needs to remind him that he is and always will be her top priority. The princess is a total mess of emotions, thinking to herself that he has always been her absolute best boy, whether it was in her favorite game or right here in the real world. She admits that she has no idea what she is even trying to say anymore, but she figures that this dramatic display should be enough to convince their audience. Eldia turns away from the intense moment with her butler to face her uninvited guests once again. Eldia offers a bright and cheerful smile to the stunned hero and priestess, announcing that she unfortunately has a very important prior arrangement with her butler that she simply cannot ignore. She politely concludes that she is afraid she will not be able to go with them. The hero and the priestess are caught in a total daze, nodding along in frantic agreement. Eldia reflects on the absurdity of the situation, noting to herself that the dramatic performance her butler just put on was certainly quite a show. The light-hearted mood suddenly shifts as Sister Yuria experiences a violent shudder. Licht notices her distress immediately and asks her what is happening. Yuria's expression turns serious, and she announces that the gate to the underworld has finally been forced open. She warns everyone that dangerous monsters are already beginning to emerge. Licht asks for the exact location of the breach, so they can intervene. Yuria confirms that the chaos is currently unfolding right in the middle of town. Albert, standing behind the princess, asks if this is the specific incident she had mentioned to him before. Eldia looks ahead with a grim and focused expression, confirming her belief. Eldia explains the mechanics of her world to her butler, noting that this specific disaster is usually triggered when the vile princess activates a powerful magic item. Since she does not actually own any such object, she concludes that the attack must be a predetermined event, much like the other unavoidable stories they have been forced to navigate in the past. The princess reflects on her previous attempts to change the course of history, remembering how she tried to avert various incidents that were destined to end in high casualties. She feels regret as she recalls that despite her best efforts, she could not stop the destruction of the hero's village or prevent the priestess from being injured so badly that she nearly lost her life. She realizes that her estate is simply too far from the city to prevent a total bloodbath. She understands that no matter how much they hurry, the damage will be done by the time they arrive, so she concludes that the best possible outcome is for the hero and the priestess to be the ones who eventually stop the monster strike. Licht declares that they must leave at once because they have a duty to try even if they might not be in time to save everyone. Yuria offers a firm and enthusiastic agreement. Yuria offers her a final, beaming smile and asks the princess to wait for them, promising with total sincerity that they will return to protect her. Eldia notes to herself that these two never hesitate to save people no matter the circumstances. Suddenly, Eldia calls out for everyone to wait, causing Licht and Yuria to stop their frantic preparations. Eldia tells a hypothetical scenario where she might actually possess the rare and powerful magic required to transport them both to the heart of the city in a single instant. The two heroes stand by the shattered window, staring back at Eldia as they try to process the weight of her offer. Eldia flashes a mischievous smile, pointing out the suspicious coincidence of her having such an incredibly convenient spell already prepared for this exact moment. She asks if they would still be willing to place their total trust in her. Licht and Yuria react with a burst of pure joy, letting out a loud shout that they would of course believe in her. Eldia is visibly moved by the unwavering trust the hero and priestess have placed in her. The princess smiles with a faint blush, reflecting on how much she truly loves the pair for being such precious and genuine souls. Eldia firmly grips her butler's hand to begin her spell, noting to herself that while her shadow magic is practically useless for hurting people, it turns out to be incredibly effective for a wide variety of other tasks. She prepares to unleash her power and a sudden rush of dark energy that swirls around her. The unique nature of her ability to transport objects and people by connecting different shadows, though she acknowledges that the technique is limited to locations she has already marked. She feels fortunate that she had the foresight to place a secret mark near the center of town, allowing her to facilitate the hero's immediate arrival at the very heart of the crisis. Eldia looks ahead with a bright expression as she unleashes the full force of her magic with a powerful command for the heroes to go forth. Licht and Yuria are being enveloped by the shadow magic. Their figures started to dissolve into the darkness. Eldia waves her hand toward the empty space by the window, noting with a sense of relief that the transport seems to have worked perfectly and that her friends have made it all right. Eldia turns back to face her butler with an apologetic expression, acknowledging that she knows he must be exhausted after such a chaotic night. Despite his tiredness, she insists that they need to make their own escape and get out of the estate immediately. Albert looks at her with a slightly puzzled expression, wondering aloud if she truly plans to leave without waiting for the hero and the priestess to return. Eldia lets out a small chuckle, explaining that while the work of the vile princess is officially finished, her true self still has a long list of things she needs to accomplish. She notes that if she lingers in this location for too long, the complex web of events she has carefully designed will likely fall apart, an observation that Albert acknowledges as being a very true and practical point. The princess leans in with a blush as she admits that she simply cannot stay because being forced to look at her favorite characters all day, every day would make it impossible for her to keep her composure. Albert notes that his mistress truly never ceases to amaze him with her unique way of thinking. Eldia notices a subtle change in her servant's demeanor and asks him if something is bothering him. Albert quickly shifts his gaze and looks away with a sweat on his face, insisting that there is nothing wrong. Albert casually mentions that they did indeed have some uninvited guests, but he has already taken the initiative to handle every single one of them. Eldia shouts in total shock about the fact that her favorite heroes actually did break into her bedroom. The princess notices a dark, jagged tear and a fresh stain of blood on her butler's shoulder. She realizes he was actually hurt during the intense skirmish. Eldia rushes forward to check on her servant with a worried expression. He observes with a touch of quiet amusement that he seems to test her ability to remain in control of herself far more than the legendary heroes ever managed to do. Eldia, in a fit of adorable frustration, demands that Albert allow her the right to worry about his well-being. She insists that since he is her absolute favorite boy, her concern is only natural. Albert acknowledges her words with a calm expression, concluding that her worry must stem entirely from the fact that he was her favorite character back in the world of the game. Eldia lets out a soft sound of confusion, flatly stating that her current feelings have absolutely nothing to do with the game she once played. A sudden shock ripples through Albert as he processes her unexpected confession. Eldia admits that while she certainly loved the version of him from the digital world, that character is not the same as the man who is standing right in front of her. She reminds him that they have been together nearly every moment since she first arrived in this body, and she declares that while he remains her favorite, he has also become her actual family over the years. Albert repeats the word family with a look of pure confusion. Eldia notices his bewildered tone and immediately snaps at him to ask what that expression is supposed to mean, even though in her mind she is screaming in total panic, wondering if she is accidentally getting far too close to him for comfort. Eldia quickly tries to backtrack by claiming that her comment about being family was just a random example, but she continues her confession by admitting that she has actually loved him since her previous life. She tells him that she was totally obsessed with him back then and feels incredibly lucky that she has managed to spend so much time by his side in this reality. Eldia looks down with a soft expression, admitting that her deep feelings make her want to keep him close, even though being near him often makes her forget her own composure. She clarifies that regardless of her selfish desire to stay by his side, she still firmly believes that his personal happiness remains the most important thing to her. Eldia's face goes pale as she wonders to herself what on earth she is even saying to him right now. Albert stares at her in a state of absolute and stunned silence. She explains that her goal is simply to avoid mixing up the person she knew from the digital world with the actual man standing before her. She covers her face, begging her butler to just forget every single word she just said. Albert asks if her words mean that in her heart, he is no longer the favorite character he used to be back in the game. Eldia lets out a frantic shout of total frustration, admitting that while he is definitely still a favorite, he has become something far more special to her now. Albert's stoic mask completely melts away, replaced by a gaze that is remarkably soft. Eldia finds herself lost in the brilliance of his eyes. The princess suddenly pulls herself back into her fangirl mindset, reflecting on the idea that she is technically supposed to stand back and adore her favorites from a safe distance. She tries to convince herself that merely wishing for their happiness from afar is the most proper way to live. Eldia reflects on her complicated feelings for her butler, realizing that she has spent years preparing herself for the inevitable moment when she might have to let him go. She admits to herself that she doesn't want to lose him. She decides that she simply cannot allow herself to indulge in such presumptuous thoughts. Albert begins to stagger. His body slumps forward with a weary groan as his strength finally gives out. Eldia rushes to catch him as he slumps against her, her voice filled with panic as she asks her beloved butler if he is actually all right. Albert rests his head on the princess's shoulder as he offers a soft apology for his sudden weakness, admitting that he took a direct hit from a silver weapon during the earlier confrontation. He explains with a faint and tired voice that using his remaining life force to create a chain from his own blood was likely a step too far. Eldia enters a state of comedic distress, her expression shifting into a cartoonish display of frustration as she demands to know why he didn't mention his injury before he took on so much. She feels a wave of sincere regret and apologizes for asking him to take care of everything when he was already suffering. Eldia looks a bit dazed as she considers the grim possibility that they might not actually be able to make their escape tonight after all. Albert leans in close to her neck as he softly asks for her permission to bite her so he can regain his lost strength. Eldia regains her focus and insists that they must get moving before the others finish their battle, telling him that he needs to be at 100% for the journey ahead. Albert acknowledges her command and reaches out to firmly grip her waist, advising his mistress that she should also steel herself. Eldia is in a state of total bewilderment as her butler pulls her into his space, leaving her mind to wonder exactly what is happening. Albert reaches out with a steady hand to gently slide the fabric of the princess's dress aside, bearing her shoulder as he prepares to recover his strength. Albert leans in as he finally bites into her skin. Eldia's eyes go wide as she experiences a wave of unfamiliar sensations. She reflects on the fact that when a vampire drinks blood, they instinctively hypnotize their victim, but since Albert is not a pure vampire, he is often unable to keep his powers in check. Because of his nature as a damper, his own deep feelings end up bleeding through to her, a phenomenon she hasn't experienced in years because he had grown so much better at controlling himself lately. She admits to herself that she was completely wrong about his previous reactions, as she had always assumed he was only trembling because he hated the act of drinking blood, but she now understands that the truth was something else entirely. She realizes she can feel the sheer intensity of Albert's gratitude, jealousy, and frustration. She is stunned to find his anger and annoyance clashing with a sense of pure delight and fondness, making her realize that she had no idea such a passionate heat was burning deep inside him. As he finishes, Albert lets out a long and satisfied exhale. Albert looks directly at Eldia and declares that those intense emotions are exactly how he feels, asking her if she truly understands the weight of his confession. Eldia begins to stammer in total panic, realizing that everything he said earlier to Licht and Yuria might not have been just for show. Albert remains perfectly composed, explaining that the most convincing lies are always created by mixing in a significant amount of truth. Albert offers a small, knowing smile as he admits that he originally intended to simply bide his time while serving by her side without ever revealing his true heart. He notes with a sense of quiet satisfaction that she has finally started to see him as a man. Eldia tries to salvage her dignity by frantically insisting that her reaction is nothing new, claiming that she always gets worked up and starts blushing whenever she is around him. Albert reaches out with a gloved hand to gently brush a lock of hair from her face, softly agreeing that she most certainly does get flustered easily. He looks at her with a tender, blushing expression of his own. Albert gently touches Eldia's face with his gloved hand, as he asks her if she has any idea how she looks at this very moment. Albert wears a playful expression, teasingly notes that based on her earlier confession, he could likely seduce her without even trying. Eldia suddenly transitions into a state of comedic shock, her mind racing at the mere mention of the word seduce, while her face turns a bright shade of red. Albert flashes a bright smile that reveals his sharp fangs, telling the princess never to fear because he has every intention of staying by her side until she finally grows sick of him. Eldia buries her face in her hands in a fit of total embarrassment, desperately wondering to herself how her life could have possibly ended up in such a chaotic state. Albert leans in with a confident gaze as he tells the princess that he is hardly the sort of man who would ever lose a competition to a version of himself that does not even exist. Albert notes with a touch of quiet satisfaction that he must truly be someone special. Eldia lets out a loud and frantic cry, clutching her head in a state of absolute panic while she wonders how her life could have possibly reached such a chaotic point. Albert's expression softens as he begins to reflect more deeply on the princess's earlier confession, wondering to himself if he has interpreted the true nature of her feelings correctly. Eldia surrenders to her emotions as she lets out a desperate scream, admitting with a face full of embarrassment that he is her absolute favorite person in existence. She declares with a burst of frantic honesty that in this very moment, he is seriously her number one above all others. The princess internally shrieks about her own stupidly honest mouth, cursing the fact that her deepest feelings have escaped her control. Eldia admits to herself that, despite her massive embarrassment, she is honestly very happy with how things have turned out. She reflects on the incredible reality that the person she once adored from afar is now standing right there in the flesh. She internal struggles as she pouts with a red face, realizing that she is completely unable to take her eyes off her butler. Her heart practically melts when she sees Albert break into a bright laugh. The story transitions to a picturesque coastal landscape where the air is warm and the palm trees are plenty. Once the dramatic ordeal of facing her supposed evil deeds is finally over, the princess makes her grand exit from her homeland. She successfully relocates to the neighboring kingdom of Istoire, settling into a lavish estate nestled within the charming resort town of Riso de Agua. The princess takes the proactive step of securing a fresh set of legal papers for herself. She decides to operate under the sophisticated alias of Elua Howard, reinventing her persona as a high-level financier with a conveniently mysterious history. Every single staff member who once worked for her directly makes the bold choice to join her in exile. Eldia thinks of the legendary heroes. She sends out a silent apology to Yuria and Licht, feeling a bit guilty for slipping away so quietly while they were busy saving the day. The new reality of her daily life is one of leisure and refined comfort. She spends her time lounging in a chair by the sunlit window, catching up on the latest headlines while enjoying a hot cup of tea. The news pages are crowded with columns of text and illustrations that capture the latest gossip and heroic exploits. Eldia looks down at the paper with a delighted expression, thinking to herself about how incredibly hard the hero and the priestess are working to fulfill their destinies. Suddenly, Albert slides a new book onto the table. Albert leans in slightly and suggests that his mistress likely wants to take the lead and handle the next steps herself. A look of total self-satisfaction crosses the princess's face as she reflects on how her butler knows her better than anyone else in the world. Her mind briefly drifts back to the intensity of that fateful night, remembering how Albert finally confessed the deep and burning feelings he had been struggling to hide for years. She recalls how she followed his confession by dropping a massive emotional bombshell of her own. She reflects on the fact that quite a bit of time has passed since they shared those shocking revelations and made their daring escape. Watching him work, Eldia reflects on how he is definitely the type of man who maintains a strict boundary between his official duties and his personal life. The princess is certain that this return to their usual routine is exactly what is happening. She admits to herself that it has finally given her racing heart a chance to settle down. Eldia muses that Albert might have become just a little less stiff in the way he speaks to her lately. She concludes that a slight change in his tone is only natural, given that they are no longer living the same high-pressure lives as they were before. Albert addresses her as Lady Elua in his smooth voice. The unexpected sound of her new name causes the princess to let out a startled squawk of surprise. Eldia quickly tries to salvage her dignity, offering a nervous and slightly smug little smile. Eldia giggles nervously and admits to herself that the way her butler addresses her often makes her behave quite strangely. She reflects on how his voice sometimes sounds as sweet as honey whenever he says her name. The princess enters a state of comedic distress as she laments the fact that she was just finally getting used to having her favorite character around her after 10 long years of living together. She feels like it is killing her now that he has upgraded himself to the status of a super favorite. She lets out an internal scream, finding it rather annoying that her butler is so perfectly cool with their current situation while she is a total mess. However, she quickly reconciles with her feelings by acknowledging that since he is so incredibly attractive, she is perfectly willing to overlook her irritation and accept his calm demeanor as part of his charm. Albert leans in with a handsome expression as he asks if there is something bothering her, noticing her slight hesitation. He calmly expresses that he would truly appreciate the opportunity for them to sit down and discuss their specific plans for going forward. Eldia agrees that she has finally managed to relax for the first time in what feels like forever. She suggests that since they have finally found this peace away from the drama of the kingdom, it is probably the right time for them to start thinking seriously about what their future holds. Albert observes his mistress with quiet amusement, pointing out that she has spent every moment of their time in this new home deeply immersed in her favorite collection. Eldia remembers how her entire life was consumed by the complex preparations for her big confrontation with the heroes. She realizes that she was so busy ensuring the script went perfectly that she didn't get to do anything nice for herself at all. The princess admits that she eventually began to go through a bit of a withdrawal after not being able to touch her collection for several months. So, she revels in her books without a single care for who might be looking at her. She concedes with a bit of a blush that she probably overdid her celebration. While the past few days of indulgence have been absolutely amazing, Eldia reminds herself that her favorites are still out there working incredibly hard to fight the powerful demon. She feels a sudden surge of inspiration, realizing that supporting them in their struggle is her sacred duty as a fan. She decides that she should probably stop being lazy and get back to work to ensure their victory. Eldia focuses intensely on her research as she tracks the progress of the heroes' party, noting that Licht and his companions have officially set out on the next leg of their journey. Based on everything they have accomplished so far, she is fairly certain that the main story is progressing just fine without her direct interference. She concludes that she should start preparing the various limited events that are meant to take place in all the specific locations where the heroes are likely to stop by. Albert calmly presents a detailed document to the princess, noting that she has successfully made strategic investments in several different locations across the land. He hands over the latest reports on her substantial profits. Eldia offers thanks as she begins to flip through her materials with a focused expression. She reflects on the current season and concludes that given the time of year, the most intriguing and anticipated events are undoubtedly the ones featuring the characters in their swimsuits. Albert seems a bit lost as he acknowledges the mention of swimming with a look of genuine confusion. Eldia enthusiastically confirms his suspicion, explaining that these specific in-game events are vital for leveling up the characters effectively. She adds that they also provide a perfect opportunity for fans to see a completely different and more relaxed side of everyone involved. The princess describes the simple logic of the season, pointing out that in the summer, the natural and expected thing to do is go to the beach. She adds that being at the beach inevitably leads to the arrival of swimsuits. Eldia lets out a burst of laughter as she recalls the sheer number of times she swiped her credit card in her previous life just for the chance to see all her favorite characters in swimsuits. Albert looks over the financial documents and realizes the true reason behind his mistress's massive spending spree in the resort town. He notes that her heavy investments were the key to the location's sudden prosperity, and he points out that she has managed to turn quite a fair profit in the process. The princess reflects on her strategic choice to use this specific town as her secret base of operations, knowing that as the main story continues to unfold, the legendary summer swimsuit event is the very next thing scheduled to happen. To make sure the setting is perfect for her favorite characters, she has been directing Albert and her other loyal helpers to conduct thorough research, slowly but surely preparing the entire town for the upcoming festivities. Eldia reviews her progress, noting that she has personally overseen the development of a fashionable line of swimwear and worked hard to popularize the activity of swimming in the ocean. She smiles with a high degree of confidence, firmly believing that her careful planning will ensure that everything goes exactly as she intended. Albert notes that despite her new life in exile, she remains completely dedicated to providing behind-the-scenes assistance to the legendary hero and the holy priestess. The princess declares with total certainty that every single thing she does is for the ultimate benefit of her favorite characters. Then she realizes she might have let her fangirl motivations show a bit too clearly. Albert watches his mistress with an admiring expression, noting that he truly loves seeing her so devoted to enjoying herself. With a playful glint in his eyes and a smirk, Albert encourages her to carry on with her enthusiastic fangirling exactly as she wishes. He adds that he is already well aware of his own special place in her heart. Eldia lets out a cry as she demands to know how he can possibly say such incredibly bold and embarrassing things with a straight face. The princess looks at her butler and wonders where he could have possibly picked up such effective seduction skills during his years of service. Albert breaks into a sincere laugh, admitting that unlike his mistress, he does not simply throw his affection at every person who happens to cross his path. He declares that her attention is the only thing in the entire world he truly wishes for. Eldia collapses face down onto the table. She is completely overwhelmed by the butler's charms, thinking to herself that his handsome face is nothing short of a lethal weapon. She clutches her head in a desperate attempt to hide her blushing face, screaming internally about how incredibly awkward the entire situation has become. She looks dazed as her mind spins with the realization that her absolute best boy has finally turned his full attention toward her. She reflects on how she has always loved him and been totally devoted to his character, but now that there is no question about how he really feels, she is left in a state of absolute bewilderment. She finds herself completely unable to figure out how a mere fan like her is supposed to deal with the reality of her favorite person loving her back. Eldia notes that having spent 10 years together as mistress and servant makes his change in behavior feel incredibly jarring and makes her feel quite self-conscious. She realizes that her discomfort stems from her lifelong preference for fictional characters over actual romance, a habit she carried even from her previous existence. With basically zero experience in the world of real-life relationships, she feels like a total beginner facing a challenge. She finds herself wondering why he could not have just waited a little bit longer before being so charming, at least until she had managed to get a proper grip on her own runaway emotions. Eldia looks over her plans, noting that considering all their preparations, the legendary swimsuit event is bound to happen without any problems. She suggests that they should simply monitor the hero's progress and be prepared to take action the moment the festivities begin. She adds that they will carry out their observations under the professional excuse of conducting final inspections. Albert accepts her instructions, promising to inform the rest of the staff about their upcoming schedule. Eldia can hardly contain her excitement, her face lighting up with a mischievous grin. The princess reflects on the grueling decade she spent playing the part of a villain, realizing that she has been so overwhelmed with duties that she never actually had a chance to enjoy the world of her favorite game before the main plot kicked off. Now that she is officially retired from her role as the vile princess, she feels a rush of energy, knowing that she is finally free to do whatever her heart desires. With a sudden burst of pure adrenaline and a thumbs up, she declares that it is finally time for them to head straight for the casino. Albert sighs and closes his eyes, noting that if her goal was simply to locate the famous casino from the game, She really should have just said so from the start. He admits, he genuinely feared his mistress might have finally lost her mind. As they make their way through the cobbled streets, Albert effortlessly carrying their heavy suitcase, Eldia demands to know what his previous comment was even supposed to mean. Albert maintains a perfectly serious expression, noting that because she has been so completely and visibly invested in the lives of the hero and the priestess, her sudden interest in a place like a gambling hall felt entirely out of character. He admits that he actually began to worry that she might have fallen under the influence of some strange and powerful curse. The princess looks at him with an annoyed expression, offering a dry word of thanks for what she considers to be a very bizarre form of trust. A pair of elegant feet take a purposeful step toward a grand and imposing structure that is clearly labeled as the town's main casino. Eldia lets out a shout that they have finally arrived at the legendary location. Eldia leads the way into the heart of the grand building, the rhythmic click of her boots echoing through the halls as Albert and her other loyal staff follow closely behind. As the doors swing wide, the girl is met with a dazzling display of opulence that leaves her looking completely mesmerized. She sees the staff members expertly managing the various counters and tables, exactly as they did in the original game. Eldia is practically vibrating with the pure joy of seeing her favorite fictional setting come to life right in front of her very eyes. However, she quickly reminds herself that she must maintain her composure, worrying that getting too carried away might result in her being thrown out for making a scene in such a prestigious establishment. One of the staff members pauses in his work to offer a polite and professional bow, expressing his sincere gratitude for their visit today. Eldia finds herself fixated on the man's clothing, noting that his uniform is an exact replica of the stylish outfit she once saw in the digital world. Eldia claps her hands together, telling herself that she simply must see every single inch of this place. The polite casino attendant suggests that the princess should begin by registering her arrival, asking her exactly how many chips she would like to purchase for her stay. Eldia turns toward her loyal butler and casually proposes that they start by spending half of the funds they brought with them. Albert hesitates for a moment, but he eventually lets out a soft acknowledgement and agrees. A massive and staggering mountain of high-value bills is placed onto a small serving tray. The casino attendant stares down at the tray in stunned silence and lets out a shock of confusion. Eldia flashes a bright smile and asks if there is any particular problem. The casino attendant scrambles away in a total panic, frantically assuring the princess that there isn't a problem at all while he hurries to exchange her massive pile of cash. Albert looks at her with a weary concern, pointing out that she really spent far too much money in a single moment. He notes that the amount she just dropped on the table is roughly 10 times more than what a normal person would ever spend. Eldia explains with total conviction that spending this kind of money is exactly the same as swiping her credit card for her favorite characters back in her previous life. She views this legendary location as a literal holy land and feels a sacred duty to offer her full support, vowing to keep pouring funds into the establishment until the hero's party finally arrives. She continues her explanation, noting that since she is still technically quite young to be seen in a casino, she needs to find a way to be taken seriously as a high-ranking guest. She concludes that the most effective way to ensure the staff treats her like a valued customer rather than a curious child is to make a massive financial statement right from the very start. Albert acknowledges that her logic is surprisingly sound in its own bizarre way, yet he still finds himself at a total loss for words. The casino attendant returns with a polite smile, offering a sincere apology for the brief delay. He carries a tray overflowing with perfectly organized stacks of chips, ready for action as he asks the princess which specific game she is interested in playing today. Eldia doesn't hesitate for a single second and declares that she would like to kick things off with a round of roulette. With the sharp, purposeful click of her heels echoing against the floor, the princess approaches the high-stakes area. A massive, staggering mountain of chips is presented on the table right next to the spinning roulette wheel. A wave of shocked murmurs ripples through the gathered crowd of guests as they stare in total disbelief at the sheer scale of the chips being played. Taking her seat at the velvet table, Eldia adopts a look of serious focus. She ponders her very first move, reflecting on the fact that while she knows the rules of the game perfectly since it was a famous minigame from the original digital world, experiencing it in the flesh feels like a much more exciting challenge. The dealer waits with a practiced patience, asking the princess to place her bet as the game is about to begin. Eldia reaches out with a steady hand and carefully places a single chip on the board. The roulette wheel spins with a rhythmic clatter, the small white ball bouncing across the numbers before finally settling into a winning slot. Eldia looks on with a stunned expression, hardly able to believe her luck as she realizes that she managed to win right off the bat on her very first try. A wave of excited murmurs fills the room as the other guests begin to clamor. The princess adopts a suspicious expression, convinced that there must be something fundamentally wrong with this specific table. A guy frantically pleads for a chance to stay, insisting with total desperation that he is absolutely certain he will win the next round. A senior manager offers a polite bow as he suggests that they should probably move their conversation to a much more private room. The room settles into a strange quiet as the staff members make their exit, leaving only the soft sound of the roulette wheel as it continues its endless spin. The princess narrows her eyes and gazes behind. Albert uses a discreet series of silent signals to convey his urgent desire for them to find a much more private place to talk. Catching the signal, the princess offers a quick and confident smile to show she understands the necessity of his request. Albert addresses that the games in this establishment are entirely rigged. He concludes that the unfortunate man who was just dragged away must have been the latest mark for the casino's deceptive tactics. Albert stands by with his usual composed expression and observes that he believes his suspicions were correct because the dealer appears to be manually manipulating the movement of the wheel itself. The princess is suddenly overcome with grief, clutching her fist while she laments the heartbreaking discovery that her beloved Holy Land has turned out to be nothing more than a dishonest and dirty gambling hall. The white ball clatters rhythmically against the edge of the spinning roulette wheel before finally sliding into a slot as the winning numbers are revealed. Eldia notes the chilling possibility that she is intended to be the next victim of their scheme, to which Albert bluntly confirms that she is indeed the casino's primary target. Albert continues his explanation by noting that the staff has likely been allowing her to win small victories specifically to lure her deeper into their trap, causing a mischievous glint to appear in the princess's eyes as she realizes they have made the grave mistake of looking down on her. Albert looks at his mistress with a calm gaze, confirming that the casino staff has indeed made the foolish mistake of underestimating her. Eldia settles into her seat and reflects on how frustrating it is to find her precious Holy Land tarnished by dishonesty the moment she finally arrives. She decides that if the staff is determined to cheat, it is only fair that she gives them a taste of their own medicine, concluding that a sense of proper order is something that is needed in every corner of the world. Albert admits that he fully expected her to take such a bold approach and gives his approval. Eldia asks for his professional guidance on exactly where she should place her bets to ensure her victory. Albert asks just how much wealth she intends to walk away with today. Her goal is to win more than enough money to simply buy the entire casino for herself. Sensing a sudden shift in the atmosphere at the table, the young dealer pauses his work and politely asks if something is the matter. Eldia leans forward with a flushed and energetic expression, assuring the dealer that nothing is wrong because the experience is simply very new to her. She adds that she is having a wonderful time and insists that they should continue the game without further delay. Albert reaches out to place a steadying hand on her shoulder, quietly addressing his concern that she might be getting a bit too carried away. The princess dismissively waves off his concern with a sharp movement, stating that she does not care about the consequences. She continues her playful outburst by pointing toward the betting table as the roulette wheel spins, explaining that she has been cooped up for far too long and deserves to finally have some genuine fun. Looking over the layout of the board, Albert realizes that the staff will grow suspicious if Eldia suddenly shifts her strategy, so he silently instructs her to continue placing column and dozen bets based on the specific numbers he indicates. Eldia slides a stack of chips onto the table with a simple acknowledgement that she understands the plan. This sudden move leaves the dealer looking completely blindsided, his face filled with visible shock. As the roulette wheel continues its clatter, Albert provides more specific guidance, suggesting that she should bet an equal amount on a new section while simultaneously doubling her current stake in the same category to keep the staff off balance. Albert tells her to quadruple her next bet, noting that the current cycle of play is finished and she should return to the fourth step of their strategy. The dealer begins to sweat under the pressure, his composure visibly cracking as he watches her pile of chips grow. Eldia reflects on the fact that she is deliberately placing her bets before the ball is even dropped, knowing that while the dealer should technically be able to manipulate the outcome, he is currently finding it impossible to do so. She realizes that her success is entirely due to her own secret intervention, as she is using her shadow magic to subtly alter the rotation speed of the wheel. The dealer is completely unnerved by the realization that he has lost all control over where the ball finally lands, unaware that the princess is the one pulling the strings behind the scenes. Eldia can hardly contain her glee as she cheers for her own success, pointing out with a wide smile that the dealer is visibly dripping with sweat. The sound of rhythmic footsteps echoes across the polished floor as a group of people moves through the crowd, signaling their arrival with a polite request for others to step aside. Albert warns the princess, noting that the management is clearly bringing out their most experienced staff to handle the situation and suggests that it is time for them to be on their guard. Eldia maintains her poise and offers a simple word of acknowledgement. A new man with a practiced smile places a firm hand on the trembling dealer's shoulder, observing that his colleague does not seem to be feeling well and offering to step in and take over the game himself. Eldia rests her hand near her winnings, casually noting that the sudden change in staff is quite an interesting development. She lets out a soft sigh and mentions that she is actually starting to feel a bit tired. Eldia playfully suggests that she might as well go all in on her very next move. Before her stands a massive and staggering mountain of chips. While the new dealer recognizes that this moment has become a desperate struggle, the princess understands that her own motivations are something entirely different. Eldia turns toward her butler with an expectant look and asks Albert if he would like to be the one to officially place this final and decisive bet. The season manager is struck by a wave of pure shock as he listens to her bold proposal. Albert offers a nervous glance toward her and suggests that she must surely be joking about such a reckless move, but a sharp and determined glint in Eldia's eye reveals that she has never been more serious. Albert locks eyes with the manager, a literal spark of tension snapping between them. With a subtle movement and a sharp exhale from the manager, Albert's supernatural charm takes hold. Albert secretly informs the princess that he has successfully secured control over the manager's will through his powers of suggestion, asking her which specific number she would like to choose for her final bet. Without a moment of hesitation, Eldia declares her choice to be number 26. Albert can only watch her, noting that his mistress truly never changes when it comes to her obsessions. Eldia adopts pouting expression, as she reflects on how natural it is for a dedicated fangirl to use a number related to their favorite person in a high-stakes moment, especially since 26 happens to be Albert's actual age in this world. Standing before her staggering mountain of chips, Eldia officially announces her decision to go with number 26 as the roulette wheel begins its final spin. The ball clatters into the slot for number 26, sending a shockwave through the room as the crowd erupts into a thunderous roar of excitement. The manager stands frozen at the table, his face pale and dripping with sweat as he watches his desperate attempt to save the casino's reputation. Eldia watches the scene with a sharp and triumphant smile. She is politely requested to relax for a moment while the staff scrambles to organize the massive mountain of funds she has won. Eldia cheers for their successful afternoon and declares that the entire experience was even more fun than she could have ever imagined. The princess acknowledges that while she did not win quite enough money to buy the entire casino as she had originally hoped, she is still very pleased with the fact that her winnings were large enough to deal a serious blow to their finances. Albert acknowledges that the substantial winnings have dealt a significant blow to the casino's finances. Eldia settles onto the sofa with a curious expression as she wonders what the management might try to do next in response to her victory. Albert explains that a standard casino would usually try to keep a lucky guest in an affiliated hotel and delay the payout to encourage them to gamble more as a way to mitigate their losses. He continues by observing that in a dishonest place like this, there is a good chance they might choose to skip the pleasantries and simply cast her into the darkness if she is deemed a lost cause, which Eldia acknowledges with a playful note that she had already figured as much. The conversation is interrupted by the arrival of the casino's manager, who offers a deep bow and an oily apology while claiming that the immense size of her winnings is the only reason cashing out is taking a bit longer. Eldia leans back on the plush sofa with a smile, suggesting that if the payout is going to be such a burden, she is perfectly happy to have the casino transfer the funds to her various accounts in small installments over time. The manager reacts with immediate horror, bowing even deeper as he insists that he could never dream of inconveniencing the president of the Howard Company. He showers her with praise, claiming she is a vital figure who has contributed immensely to the overall welfare and prosperity of the entire town. Eldia plays along, noting that she only ever made a few small investments here and there. Internally, she realizes with a sense of relief that the manager has clearly done his homework on her secret identity, concluding that since he knows she is a powerful financier, the risk of the casino staff trying to eliminate her has dropped to almost zero. The manager maintains his overly polite facade and chuckles at her humility, asserting that the town's current level of luxury is entirely thanks to the generous aid provided by her predecessor. He concludes his flattering speech by admitting that while he is still relatively new to his position in the area, he is already well aware of her incredible reputation and great renown. Eldia listens to his smooth words. Eldia finds the manager's praise hilarious because the predecessor he keeps mentioning doesn't actually exist outside of her own imagination. The princess reflects on the origins of her business empire, remembering how she established the Howard Company as a strategic front when she was only 12 or 13 years old. To maintain the illusion of a legitimate enterprise, she frequently had Albert don a disguise to look like an older gentleman and act as the rising financier leading the company. She recalls the final stage of her secret plan, where she officially killed off the fictional first-generation president once she had secured her own freedom. She seamlessly transitioned into the role of the new head of the business by posing as his daughter, a complex secret that remains known only to her most trusted inner circle. Eldia decides she might as well lean into the role and push the situation as far as it can possibly go. Letting out a weary sigh, the princess rests her chin on her hand and tells the manager that she only visited the casino for a brief moment of relaxation. She mentions that she has many other important places to be and asks if she is finally free to make her departure. The manager leans forward with a sweaty, oily grin and mentions that he has a small proposal he would like to share with the princess. Eldia maintains her casual posture while she asks what that proposal might be, prompted by the manager's observation that she appears to be an exceptionally skilled gambler. With an expansive gesture, the manager asks if she would be interested in participating in a game that is far more interesting and stimulating than the one she just played. Eldia reflects on the description of a stimulating game, internally noting that no matter how she looks at the situation, the offer feels like it must involve something completely illegal. She continues since he is presenting this offer to someone of her high standing in the town. She is fairly certain that the secret venue is something far more elaborate than just another ordinary casino. Eldia expresses her sudden and intense interest by encouraging the manager to share every single detail about his mysterious offer. Internally, she reveals her true motive by noting that she wants to learn everything she can about this operation specifically, so she can dismantle the entire thing right at its very source. The sound of their footsteps echoes through the hallway as Eldia and Albert follow the manager down a long and winding spiral staircase. As the heavy doors swing wide, leaves Eldia in a state of total shock as she finally gets her first look at the hidden world waiting behind the casino walls. The scale of the operation is truly massive, and Eldia gazes out at a staggering coliseum filled with rows upon rows of masked guests who have all gathered to witness the brutal spectacles. She realizes she has entered an underground fight club where spectators can experience the thrill of betting on combatants who are free to use everything from powerful magic to personal weapons. The rules of the establishment are remarkably simple, requiring guests to choose a winner while being fully aware that their bets will be collected immediately if their chosen fighter fails to succeed. The manager gestures toward the shelves of equipment and explains that for an additional optional fee, guests have the power to limit the gear and weaponry provided to the fighters in the arena. Eldia responds with a sarcastic comment about how wonderful the arrangement sounds, while internally she reflects on the reality that the entire operation is actually quite disgusting. The princess is suddenly overcome with internal rage, screaming to herself that the situation is pitch black and incredibly seedy. She finds it hard to believe that the very town she invested so much of her fortune into is involved in such dark activities, leaving her feeling absolutely furious. Looming in the shadows with a grin, the manager informs his guests that the house rule dictates that once a person has entered the Colosseum, they are required to either place at least one bet on a match or pay a substantial entry fee. Eldia acknowledges the situation with a calm tone, while she internally realizes that in order to leave the establishment in one piece, she will likely have to commit to placing a massive bet. Eldia experiences a sudden shudder as she realizes the manager's true intent. She understands that he is likely planning to squeeze a massive fortune out of her to keep his struggling casino afloat, noting that the arbitrary entry fee could easily be whatever exorbitant amount he decides it should be. Looking over at Albert, Eldia notices a dangerous tension radiating from him. She senses that her butler is only seconds away from snapping. Eldia adopts a pouting expression as she listens to the roaring cheers of the crowd. She concludes that now that she has a clear and disappointing understanding of the dark operations occurring here, her best course of action is probably to find a way to get out of the building as quickly as possible. The princess's eyes go wide with total shock as a burly combatant armed with a massive axe steps into the arena. The atmosphere in the Colosseum becomes even more electric as a woman dressed in a stylish bunny outfit and fishnets strides into the spotlight. The woman stands in the center of the arena, her expression carrying a heavy weight. The stadium is filled with the roar of a disrespectful crowd, as the spectators shout Susie demands for her to take off her clothes or kill her opponent while they cheer for the bunny girl. Amidst the noise, the fighter remains silent, her downward gaze reflecting a deep sense of discomfort. Eldia watches the scene with a growing sense of horror and realization, noting that this woman was never meant to be paraded around in such a revealing outfit. She understands that as a true martial artist, the fighter likely despises seeing her craft reduced to a seedy spectacle for a gambling den, and she is clearly struggling with the indignity of the situation. The princess clenches her hand over her heart and reaches out to tug on her butler's sleeve, urgently telling Albert that he needs to pay close attention. Albert looks down at his mistress with a start, wondering if she's been overcome by the intensity of the moment or perhaps something else entirely. Eldia becomes a total mess of emotions, saying that this warrior is actually another one of her absolute favorite characters from the game. The figure standing in the center of the arena is none other than Chucusa Tagetsu, a legendary samurai hailing from the distant kingdom of Joa. Eldia recognizes her immediately as a member of the beast folk with distinct rabbit characteristics, recalling from her game knowledge that this warrior was destined to cross paths with the hero while she was on a combat training journey across the continent. The stadium erupts into a thunderous roar of excitement as Chucusa easily stands over her fallen opponent, yet the princess is left in a state of utter confusion as she notices that the girl is winning her matches using nothing more than a simple wooden stick. Leaning over the balcony, Eldia frantically wonders what could have happened to Chucusa's exclusive weapon, the legendary blade that she is supposed to treasure even more than her own life, while Albert looks on with a steady gaze. She asks for the identity of the mysterious woman. The manager lets out a greasy laugh as he explains that the warrior arrived at their establishment already burdened by a massive debt, and since she possesses such a prideful nature, they decided to arrange for her to wear that embarrassing costume purely for the amusement of their guests. The princess responds to the manager's explanation with a dry observation. The manager asks the mistress exactly what she wishes to do next. Eldia gazes at the warrior and wonders if her butler believes he could take her down, noting that since the samurai is currently not at her best, it should be an easy task for him. Albert calmly assures the princess that with just a small amount of reinforcement, he is certain he could corner the fighter. A smug look of satisfaction crosses the girl's face as she lets out a little laugh, silently praising her talented butler for being so reliable. She quickly catches herself and snaps back to reality, realizing that she cannot simply stand by while one of her top favorites is trapped in such a miserable predicament. Eldia tells herself that she absolutely must take action because leaving her beloved character in this state would be unthinkable. Looking back at the manager, Eldia speaks up, catching the man off guard as she calmly informs him that she wants to acquire the rabbit samurai. Eldia looks ahead with a sharp gaze, repeating her decision to acquire the rabbit samurai. The manager begins to sweat as she reminds him that his establishment is intended for gambling and she would truly hate to deprive the other guests of such a popular source of entertainment. A smile spreads across Eldia's face as she suggests a new arrangement, proposing that if her own man is able to win a match against the warrior, she should be allowed to purchase her outright. She continues her bold offer by promising to pay back every cent of the debt the fighter owes, while also providing a substantial convenience fee to ensure the management is well compensated for their loss. Deep down, the princess feels a bit of a struggle because she truly hates the idea of treating one of her favorite characters like a piece of property, but she realizes that the situation will likely go much smoother if she simply chooses to play along with their rules for now. The manager takes a moment to weigh the risks, finally acknowledging that the choice of how to proceed rests entirely with him. He looks toward the quiet man standing beside the princess and asks if the servant will be the one stepping into the arena to fight. Eldia beams with a sudden burst of pride as she confirms her deep fondness for Albert, explaining that while he might not look like a warrior, he is actually remarkably powerful. With a sinister grin, the manager adds a chilling disclaimer, stating that his establishment takes absolutely no responsibility for the death of any combatants who enter the ring. Eldia lets out a delighted laugh and remarks that the added danger only makes the upcoming match feel all the more exciting. The manager officially accepts the wager, promising to relinquish the rabbit samurai if the servant is truly able to best her. Eldia turns toward her butler with a bright smile, noting that since he has heard the manager's terms, she wants him to go forth and secure a victory on her behalf. Albert lowers himself to one knee as he promises to fulfill her wish. Maintaining his humble posture, Albert takes her hand and looks up with a gaze of absolute devotion, declaring that his only focus is achieving victory for his lady. Albert runs his tongue across her hand with a soft licking sound, drinking blood. The sudden display of chivalry leaves Eldia in a state of total shock, and she finds herself blushing as she reflects on how rarely he ever acts so gallant. Sensing her internal state, Albert secretly asks his mistress to keep it down and regain her composure. A look of realization washes over the princess as she covers her mouth, suddenly remembering that she still has their shadows connected through her magic. The Colosseum announcer addresses the gathered crowd, declaring that they have a last-minute special match prepared for their enjoyment as a wave of excited clamor ripples through the stadium. Eldia stands at the balcony with a sense of sudden apprehension. She reflects on the fact that within the original game, Chucusa belongs to the Knight class and serves as a devastating attack unit that specializes in delivering incredibly powerful blows. Meanwhile, the princess notes that Albert is a specialized stealth attacker who excels at striking an opponent's weak points to debuff or immobilize them, even though the digital mechanics suggest he cannot hold his own in a direct, face-to-face battle. Eldia watches with intense focus, acknowledging that regardless of what the game's stats once said, this world is now her actual reality. Eldia looks down at the arena, noting that even though the matchup technically isn't in his favor, she doesn't feel a bit of worry. She understands that while she can't see his current stats, this version of Albert possesses the ability to think before he acts. She reflects on the fact that Chucusa's unique in-game skill is a highly specialized attack, a one-hit kill move powered by sheer speed. In her memories of the digital world, no normal human could ever hope to keep up with the samurai's lethal velocity. As the crowd erupts into a deafening roar of anticipation, the princess acknowledges that the same rules of combat still apply here in reality. A mischievous glint appears in Eldia's eyes with a realization. The air is suddenly filled with a heavy thwack as Albert manages to intercept the samurai's strike with precision. Eldia reflects on the fact that her dear servant isn't actually 100% human. The skirmish begins with a sharp smack as Albert effortlessly parries the Rabbit Samurai's opening move, leaving the seasoned warrior looking completely blindsided by a simple butler's reflexes. With a sudden movement, the girl lunges across the arena like a shadow. The sound of a slide signals the end of the match as Albert's hidden weapon catches the warrior's wooden stick, resulting in a clean snap. The entire arena seems to freeze in a moment of pure shock as Albert pins the defeated samurai against the cold wall. A deafening roar of approval ripples through the crowd as the masked guests go absolutely wild for the victor. Eldia beams with satisfaction, casually announcing that she will be taking the Rabbit Samurai now, exactly as they had previously agreed. The manager's expression darkens as several large, imposing guards suddenly move into position behind him, and he asks Miss Howard to wait right where she is while his staff takes care of wrapping up their business. Adopting a look of confusion, the princess wonders aloud if the massive mountain of chips she just won at the roulette table isn't quite enough to cover the transaction. The manager lets out a mocking laugh, remarking how annoying it is to deal with naive young ladies before coldly informing her that playtime is over and that the usual rules of society simply do not apply in his coliseum. Standing calmly at the balcony above the group, Eldia gazes down at the gathered thugs and insists that this situation is most certainly still a game to her. A sudden, heavy thud echoes through the room. The manager and his guards are suddenly frozen in place, with looks of pure terror, as a violent surge of dark energy erupts from the floor, trapping them in a swirl of shadow magic. Eldia praises Albert for his success in the ring and suggests that it is finally time for them to make their exit. Her butler offers a quiet acknowledgement as he prepares to follow her command and carry the warrior to safety. Offering a bright and cheerful smile to those left behind, the princess announces that she is officially taking her leave and remarks that the entire experience was quite enjoyable. The group vanishes from the underground coliseum in a single instant. Safe within the walls of the grand estate, the Rabbit Samurai kneels on the plush rug and observes that the servant told her of the princess's noble wish to offer her some aid. Chucusa admits that she truly appreciates being taken away from such a horrible and degrading place, while Eldia looks at her with quiet surprise. The warrior stands with a rigid sense of honor, sternly reminding the princess that what she has done today is technically against the law of the land. She makes it clear by declaring that she will never pledge her loyalty or her blade to someone who willingly chooses a life of crime, leaving Eldia looking completely stunned by the samurai's intense moral code. Chucusa continues, admitting that she has no idea what the princess actually expects from her after such a suspicious rescue. She warns that if the intent is to humiliate her further, she will resist with every fiber of her being, firmly demanding to know what Eldia has to say for herself. Rather than offering a logical explanation, Eldia collapses into a state of total fangirl overload, screaming into the floor about how incredibly precious the warrior truly is. The sheer volume of the princess's outburst causes Chucusa to jump in a total panic. Eldia gushes over how cool the samurai is for recognizing her desire to help despite her reputation as a villain and a criminal. She finds the warrior's ability to offer a thank you under such suspicious circumstances to be a display of noble character that is almost too much to bear, leaving her frantically wondering what she could ever do to deserve such preciousness as she loudly calls out for Albert. Albert observes the intense tension in the room and notes that the legendary samurai appears to be quite shocked by the current situation. He suggests that the princess should start the interaction properly by introducing herself first to help ease the awkwardness. With a sudden and energetic movement, Eldia drops into a deep bow that causes Chucusa to let out a startled cry of surprise. The princess loudly introduces herself as Elua Howard, explaining with total enthusiasm that she is the one currently in charge of the Howard Company. Clearly overwhelmed by the sudden shift in atmosphere, she stammers out her own name as she identifies herself as Chucusa Tagetsu. The simple act of the warrior speaking directly to her sends Eldia into another fit of pure fangirl ecstasy as she screams internally about how incredible it is that her favorite character is actually talking to her. Chucusa begins to tremble uncontrollably on the floor, admitting that she is utterly confused because the woman who seemed so bold and free with her actions earlier now feels like an entirely different person. Albert looks down, calmly explaining that while it might be hard to believe, this chaotic and emotional display is actually his mistress's true self. Eldia looks at Chucusa with a serious expression and promises that she truly has no intention of doing anything to cause her harm. She explains that she simply could not stand the thought of leaving the warrior in such a terrible place. Chucusa remains quiet and uncertain, while Eldia continues her declaration by stating that she is determined to crush that casino at all costs. The princess adopts a more intense gaze and asks the samurai if she might be willing to share the story of what exactly happened to lead her into such a predicament. Eldia enters a state of total fangirl chaos, her eyes spinning frenzy as she excitedly shouts that for right now, she just wants to be allowed to throw money at her favorite person. Chucusa lets out a terrified shriek, looking completely overwhelmed as she admits that she is afraid. She has absolutely no idea what the princess is even trying to say to her anymore. Eldia is suddenly struck by a wave of panic as she realizes that her eccentric behavior and fangirl outbursts are likely doing nothing more than scaring off one of her absolute favorite characters. The warrior softens her stance and admits that while the princess clearly does not bear her any ill will, the specific circumstances that led to her ending up at the casino are far too embarrassing for her to share. Eldia responds with a look of determination, promising to help recover the legendary sword known as Hagazuki and asking for the current location of the weapon so they can begin their search. The mention of the sword's name sends a fresh shockwave through the room, causing Chucusa to wonder how a total stranger could possibly know the secret name of her treasured blade. With a calm and knowing expression, Eldia explains that since it is a well-known fact that Chucusa treats Hagazuki like her very soul and never lets it out of her sight, the simple observation that the sword is not in her possession makes it obvious she was only in that horrible place to get it back. Albert quickly places his gloved hand over the princess's mouth, gently advising his mistress to wait because her perfectly accurate deductions are clearly causing the warrior a great deal of emotional distress. Eldia can only make a muffled sound of surprise as she is silenced, while Chucusa looks away with a deep flush of embarrassment on her face. The memory of the ordeal reveals that the samurai was originally offered a place to stay that turned out to be far more expensive than she ever imagined, leaving her heavily burdened by debt before she even realized what was happening. Driven by her honor, she swore she would repay every cent and made the heartbreaking choice to hand over Hagazuki, a blade she views as an extension of her very body, to guarantee her commitment. Albert maintains a steady and serious expression as he observes that the entire unfortunate situation was likely exactly what the casino management intended to happen from the very beginning. Now free to speak again, Eldia notes that it is precisely her stubbornness and unshakable sense of duty that makes her such a wonderful and precious person. She concludes that even though Chucusa felt a moral obligation to pay back the cost of a single meal and a night's rest, the dishonest staff members were almost certainly targeting her legendary blade right from the start. Albert finds herself wondering if a single sword could truly fetch such an incredible price, to which Eldia explains that people have been treating Juin blades like priceless works of art recently, causing their overall value to skyrocket across the land. She continues his explanation of the weapon's value, noting that this specific sword was forged from rare magical ore, which essentially makes it a one-of-a-kind treasure. Eldia adds that if such a blade were presented to the right collectors, they would gladly spend an amount of money equal to the massive fortune she won at the casino earlier that day, prompting Albert to acknowledge that the situation finally makes perfect sense. This deep knowledge of her personal business causes Chucusa to narrow her eyes in suspicion, as she demands to know exactly how much the princess knows about her and wonders if their paths have somehow crossed in the past. The princess is instantly sent into a state of swirly-eyed panic as she realizes her mistake, frantically reminding herself that while she knows everything about the warrior, they have never actually met. She curses her own excitement for being around one of her favorite characters and worries that everything will be ruined if she loses the samurai's trust now, so she quickly tries to salvage the moment by firmly stating that they have never met before today. Albert steps in with a calm and reassuring smile, explaining that his mistress, Lady Elua, only knows about the samurai because of things she witnessed within a powerful vision. Chucusa reacts with pure shock, asking if the princess is actually a seer. Albert notes that while his mistress does have visions, her sight is quite limited, and the warrior should not expect too much from her gift. Eldia is internally cheering for her butler, praising his brilliant save while reflecting on how they have established a cover story where her game knowledge is explained as seeing different possibilities for the future. She is immensely relieved that seeing the future is a known phenomenon in the world of emotion fantasy. Chucusa looks on with a bewildered expression, feeling as though the princess sees far more than just a simple performance when she gazes at her. Albert casually explains that Eldia has become a dedicated fan and warns that she has these eccentric episodes quite often, suggesting the samurai will eventually get used to the behavior. The warrior decides that if the princess has truly witnessed that much of her life through visions, she has no choice but to accept the situation. She tentatively asks if she may address her rescuer as Lady Elua, a request that sends the princess into a state of tearful joy. Chucusa looks down with a sense of resignation, beginning to conclude that her treasured blade is likely lost to her forever. Sensing the warrior's sadness, Eldia quickly interrupts with a loud declaration that everything is going to be perfectly fine. Driven by a sudden burst of determination, Eldia insists that the warrior absolutely must have her sacred sword at her side once again, and she promises to personally recover that vital part of Chucusa's soul, while urging her new favorite character never to lose hope. Albert watches the exchange, wondering aloud how the samurai manages to deliver such incredibly charming and alluring lines without even realizing the effect she is having on those around her. Chucusa hesitates as she looks away, admitting that although she truly appreciates the generous offer, she simply cannot bring herself to trust the princess yet. Eldia acknowledges the warrior's suspicion, understanding that the ruthless way she conducted herself back in the arena has left a negative impression, and she reflects on how her chosen role as an antagonist occasionally makes making friends a bit difficult. Clenching her fist, Chucusa asks for the opportunity to work off the debt incurred on her behalf, swearing that even without the legendary blade she treasures, she will dedicate her skills to fighting for the princess as long as they are together, a sincere vow that leaves Eldia looking completely breathless. Eldia is overcome with emotion as she wipes away a tear and tells the warrior that she is truly grateful for her words, while she secretly thinks to herself that the samurai is simply far too precious. Albert looks down at her and points out that she accidentally said her embarrassing internal thoughts out loud, leaving Chucusa sitting there in a state of absolute confusion. The heavy silence of the room is interrupted by the arrival of a new face. The maid lets out a sudden exclamation about how striking the warrior's outfit is, causing Chucusa to jump and blush furiously as she tries to hide her revealing costume. Taking pity on the embarrassed samurai, the cat girl maid notes that it must be incredibly difficult for a proud warrior to be seen in such a way and promises to find her some proper clothes later. Chucusa is visibly relieved by the offer and admits she never expected to meet another member of the Juan race in this land, asking if the maid is actually a feline, to which the girl offers a bright confirmation while her long tail waves happily in the air. The cheerful maid, Sora, beams as she explains that Lady Elua was the one who bought her, noting that her super-rare blue eyes were the primary reason she was originally sold off into service. Sora continues by mentioning that many nobles seek out beastfolk to use as mere decorations or pets, recalling how her first master was truly the worst. She expresses deep gratitude for her current life under Lady Elua's care, which she finds remarkably easy and pleasant, until Albert intervenes and firmly commands her to stop the idle chatter and return to her duties. Sora quickly acknowledges the order and enthusiastically tells the warrior to follow her. Eldia collapses onto the plush sofa with a heavy thud, lamenting to herself that the warrior's sudden sincerity was far too much to handle and felt like a total form of cheating. Albert remains perfectly composed as he settles onto the seat nearby, calmly requesting that his mistress take off her makeup before she begins one of her rants. The princess lets out a frustrated sound as she finds herself staring into her butler's striking and intense gaze. Eldia frantically insists that she is perfectly capable of cleaning her own face. Albert holds his mistress's chin with a steady hand, gently instructing her to stay still as he explains that he simply cannot complete his work if she keeps moving. The princess experiences a moment of distress, silently begging him not to murmur, so close to her because she feels she has already reached her limit for intense emotional moments today. Albert studies her expression and notes that she appears perfectly normal to him, leading Eldia to offer a nervous wink while wondering exactly what he could be implying. Albert asks for clarification on the specific role Chucusa Tagetsu plays in her life, explaining that he needs to understand her feelings so he can decide how to properly handle the new guest. Eldia admits that the warrior was one of the very first characters she ever recruited into her adventuring party. She recalls how the samurai's combat skills and straightforward playstyle were incredibly accessible for a beginner, noting that she ended up relying on the warrior just as much as she did on Albert himself and simply found herself captivated by her over time. Eldia points out that the warrior's first appearance in the original timeline shouldn't happen for quite some time, and notes that she is supposed to have her legendary sword with her, prompting Albert to observe that the samurai truly isn't supposed to be here at all. Albert seeks clarification on whether the woman is meant to be a part of the grander story, and Eldia confirms a suspicion while adding that her presence in this location suggests that something has gone fundamentally wrong. Reflecting on her 10 years in this world, the princess realizes that while some events are destined to happen regardless of her actions, others require her to actively intervene to make them a reality, noting how difficult it is to tell which category each specific plot point falls into. Considering the samurai's prideful nature, Albert states his belief that something is definitely starting to go awry, causing Eldia to let out a little laugh as she remarks on how blunt her butler is being even by his own sharp standards. The princess declares that their primary goal for now is to recover the stolen sword and asks Albert to secure an appointment with the Ordi family so she can uncover more about the casino's secrets. Albert agrees that they must work carefully behind the scenes if the blade is truly that valuable and promises to personally investigate the local distribution networks. Eldia offers a bright and sincere word of thanks to her butler. The princess looks up and asks if he is already finished with her skincare, prompting Albert to observe that he is constantly amazed by how passionate she becomes whenever one of her favorite characters is involved. With a sudden burst of energy, Eldia proudly declares that everything she does is for the ultimate happiness of her favorites, insisting that these are the people she truly cares for. Albert notes that it has been a long time since she has shown such an intense reaction, pointing out that she hasn't behaved this way since the moment she first encountered the legendary hero and the holy priestess. Eldia finds herself confused by her butler's sudden change in demeanor, internally noting that he is acting rather strange and wondering if he might be feeling displeased, lonely, or perhaps even a little bit sulky. Eldia leans into her butler and softly asks if he is feeling tired, noting that he really seemed to let loose with his display of power in the arena earlier that day. Albert makes a sudden, startling request for his mistress to touch him, leaving the princess staring at him. The princess is left in a state of total bewilderment. She frantically wonders if she is truly expected to touch a man so incredibly handsome that he is practically a living work of art. Eldia crosses her arms in a firm rejection, declaring that while adoring him from a distance is perfectly fine, physical touching is strictly forbidden. Eldia declares that favorite characters are meant for appreciating, idolizing, and cherishing, but one should never actually cross the line and try to touch them. Albert notes that while she often says some rather astonishing things, he has realized that she never actually makes physical contact with anyone, including himself. Eldia thinks that while technology like virtual reality exists, it is still limited to the world inside the game, and she honestly believes that her distant behavior stems from the reality that all her favorites were originally stuck behind a digital screen. She understands that while she enjoys cheering her favorites on, the overzealous behavior of fans can sometimes spoil how others perceive the characters they love, and she realizes that since there are so many other passionate fans out there, these characters will never actually be hers alone. The princess acknowledges that even though it might sound like an exaggeration, The way she conducts herself can reflect poorly on her favorite characters, so she believes everyone should be free to fantasize as they wish, as long as those thoughts remain private and they respect the proper time, place, and occasion. Eldia notes that while fans might have wild thoughts in their heads, they should never actually act on those feelings in the real world. The princess shouts her most sacred command, insisting that the ultimate and absolute law of any true fan is that one simply does not ever lay a finger on their favorites. Albert leans in, testing her resolve by asking if her strict rules would still apply even when the very person she adores is the one giving her his full permission to finally cross that line. He reaches out to firmly take her hand in his. Albert notes that her entire theory is based on the assumption that these characters are merely public property meant to be shared by every fan. He draws her even closer and explains that even if she views him as nothing more than a favorite character from a game, she is the only person who truly matters to him right now, leaving the princess completely dazed and breathless. Albert continues by telling the princess that she officially has his permission to touch him. He makes it clear that she is free to do whatever she likes. The sudden forwardness of her butler sends Eldia into a total state of panic. Albert leans in, reminding his mistress that because he is her devoted servant, she has always held the absolute right to order him to do anything her heart desires. Eldia finds herself in confusion, reflecting on how she has spent so long adoring him as her favorite character that even though she knows his feelings are real, she honestly has no idea how to handle the situation. Albert leans over the princess, asking her to simply admit that she has finally fallen for him. Eldia lets out a faint sound of distress as she finds herself completely pinned under his steady gaze. She experiences a sudden jolt of confusion, reflecting on how unusual this behavior is for her butler since he normally relies on his dry sense of humor to make sharp comments and leave her hanging. The princess stammers his name and admits she is probably just overthinking the situation, leading Albert to calmly ask what she is trying to say. She takes a wild guess and asks if his strange behavior is actually a result of him being jealous of the way she was just squealing over the legendary samurai warrior. Albert admits that she is apparently not as oblivious to his true feelings as he had initially expected. Albert turns his head with a smug little huff, while Eldia reflects on the fact that she is not so far gone that she would fail to notice the feelings of a man who has made his deep affections for her absolutely crystal clear. Albert looks away, admitting that while he fully understands the kind of fangirl she is at heart, that does not mean he can ever bring himself to just accept being treated like a fictional character. Eldia's eyes go wide as she notices a faint flush on her servant's face, realizing that her cool and composed butler is actually blushing from intense embarrassment. The princess is left in a state of total bewilderment, her mind fixated on the reality that Albert, a man who is famously as cool as a cucumber, is currently feeling completely flustered right in front of her. Albert leans in with a confident smile that shows off his sharp fangs, asking the princess exactly what her response is to his sudden and honest declaration of love. Completely overwhelmed by the intensity of the moment, Eldia lets out a frantic shout and collapses face down onto the sofa, her uncontrollable emotions causing a surge of dark energy to erupt through the room while her butler watches.